It started with a question so small it almost sounded polite. One of those questions that shouldn't matter but somehow flips your whole life sideways. You got a receipt for that. And I remember looking up from my laptop, fingers numb from the cold brain, still halfway inside a sentence I'd been wrestling with for hours and thinking, wait, is this really happening right now? Because there, I was sitting on a bench on my own campus, books stacked next to me, notes spread out, laptop open to a document that had basically become my entire personality, and a campus police officer was staring at me like I'd just been caught doing something dirty. I told him calmly at first, "It's mine. I'm working on my dissertation," and he didn't miss a beat, didn't soften, didn't even hesitate. He just leaned a little closer and said, "Yeah, right. People like you steal these and try to pawn them." And in that moment, before anything else went wrong, before the cuffs, before the snow on my face, before millions of strangers watched it happen online, something inside me just dropped. You know what I mean? That feeling where you realize this isn't about what you're doing, it's about who someone has decided you are. I'm William Lawson, and up until that morning, my life was stressful in the normal PhD student kind of way. Deadlines, anxiety, imposter syndrome whispering in your ear at 3 a.m. The constant fear that you've somehow fooled an entire department into thinking you're smart enough to be there. I grew up in Detroit in a family that treated education like oxygen, not because we were fancy or privileged, but because my parents had watched too many doors slam shut for people who didn't have degrees. I was the kid who couldn't sit still, who finished assignments early and then got in trouble for being bored, who tapped his foot until teachers thought I was doing it on purpose. ADHD wasn't something people talked about much back then, it was just another way of saying try harder. But my mom pushed for answers, and once we had them, things slowly started to make sense. I learned how to work with my brain instead of fighting it. Learned that movement helped me think that silence sometimes made my thoughts louder instead of quieter. School was never easy, but it became possible, and then it became something I was actually good at. By the time I made it to the University of Michigan for my PhD in urban planning, I knew who I was and why I was there. My research was about environmental racism, about why certain communities always seem to end up next to highways, factories, toxic sites, and why the people breathing that air were almost always poor, almost always black or brown. I wasn't chasing a title, I was chasing proof data nobody could shrug off. And that dissertation, the one sitting open on my laptop that morning, held 4 years of interviews, maps, data analysis, sleepless nights, and more self-doubt than I care to admit. I was 47 days away from defending it. 47. Close enough to taste the finish line, close enough that every hour felt precious. The final stretch of a PhD messes with your head in a special way. You're exhausted but wired, proud but terrified, confident 1 minute, and convinced you're a fraud the next. My anxiety had been spiking. My ADHD meds helped with focus, but not with the emotional noise. And my therapist kept telling me, change your environment when it gets bad. Don't trap yourself in one space. So sometimes I worked outside even in the cold, because open air gave my thoughts room to breathe. That Saturday morning I layered up, packed my backpack, grabbed my MacBook Pro, the same one I'd bought with student loan money 2 years earlier, and walked to the diag. Snow on the ground, students passing through, nothing unusual. I brushed off a bench, sat down, opened my document, and disappeared into chapter 6 like the rest of the world didn't exist. Until it did. Footsteps. A shadow. That question. You got a receipt for that computer, I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it didn't compute. A receipt. Who carries receipts for laptops they bought years ago? I explained again. It's mine. I'm a PhD student. I'm working. He looked at my laptop like it was evidence, looked at me like I was lying, and said that line, "People like you steal these. People like you." 3 words that somehow carried centuries of assumption in them. I felt my chest tighten, felt that familiar calculation start running in my head. How do I stay calm? How do I not make this worse? How do I protect myself and my work at the same time? I told him my ID was in my backpack, offered to show it, offered to call my advisor, offered anything that would let this end quietly. He didn't want any of it. "Hand it over," he said, reaching for the laptop. My body reacted before my brain could negotiate. I pulled it to my chest. "No," I said, and my voice didn't sound defiant, so much as desperate. That laptop wasn't just property. It was 4 years of my life, my future sitting under my fingertips. He stepped closer. "Stop resisting," he said, even though I hadn't moved. That's when my anxiety took over. Leg-bouncing hands, shaking breath, getting shallow. I could feel tears coming, and I hated that part because I knew how it would look. And sure enough, he looked at my shaking and decided it meant guilt, looked at my tears and decided it meant manipulation. He grabbed my arm. I tried to explain again, my voice cracking. Now I'm a student. Please check my ID. He didn't. He twisted my arm, forced me off the bench, and the next thing I knew, my face was in the snow, cold and wet, my books scattered, my laptop ripped out of my hands. I heard someone nearby say, "He said he's a student," and the officer snapped back, "Step away, or you'll be arrested too." Then the cuffs clicked around my wrists. I wish I could explain how humiliating that sound is when you know you've done nothing wrong. It's not just metal closing, it's a declaration. I kept saying, "My ID is in my bag," kept thinking if he just looked, this would all stop. He didn't look. He walked me across the diag like I was a spectacle, hands cuffed behind my back, snow soaking into my jeans, my mind spinning between panic and disbelief. Inside the campus police building, he finally opened my backpack, pulled out my M card, and everything changed in a split second. He stared at it, logged into the system, saw my profile pop up on the screen. PhD candidate, good standing defense scheduled. And I watched his confidence evaporate. A supervisor came in, took one look at me shivering in a chair, wrists red, tears still drying on my face, and then looked at the screen. "Why didn't you check his ID before arresting him?" she asked. He didn't have an answer. She uncuffed me, apologized, handed me back my laptop. I nodded, because